Welcome, everybody. Hope you are having an amazing day. We are here to do, as promised, an interview just to talk about National Kidney Month. And I want an opportunity for you to hear and see someone who has experienced the donor process. So I am going to just open it right up and just ask Ms. Jacqueline to introduce herself, tell us a little bit about us. Go ahead and tell people how they can contact you just in case they can't stay on for the entire duration of our conversation.
Hello, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me on Facebook Live or this Facebook conversation. It's very important to share about the kidney donation process. So I am Jacqueline Johnson. I'm just a average everyday person who really heard the call in terms of donating my kidney. I live here in High Point, North Carolina with my family, and I am a human resources VP by day. Do lots of things in the community, such as community service, have my own nonprofit organization, etc. How can you reach me? I am on so many different social media platforms, including Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. So you could potentially find me by my name. I'm mostly listed as I am Jackie C. Johnson or I am Jacqueline Clark Johnson. That's how you can find me on those major platforms.
Thank you. And for those who are here and may not know me, I am Nikidra Brown. I am a nurse practitioner by profession. I, like Jackie, do a lot of things. One thing that I'm most passionate about is I have a nonprofit called Zing Life Services, and we bring care to the community. One of the things that we are really focused on is helping those who are minorities, underserved, and uninsured help find their way and navigate the healthcare process because it can be so intimidating. So we like to educate, motivate, and uplift people to make sure they're living their best life. I also have a health and wellness group called Stroke by Love. So I also teach African American women mainly how to achieve that level of health and wellness that they so desire. Oftentimes we put ourselves last, and so I kind of bring out the best in you and make sure you put your best foot forward. So that's who I am. I have to say really quickly that we've probably known each other for maybe a month or so. And I always tell people there are really no coincidences. People will say, oh, it's a coincidence. There are really no coincidences. Every year during the month of March, I typically do an interview. And I typically like for it to be an interview with someone different because I like for the audience to get a different interview every year. And so this March, I had no idea who I was going to interview. Now, already previously aligned was your event that I went to, and we didn't know each other when I
Wait
came.
a minute, you didn't just attend. You were a panelist, a
I was
major
a
contributor.
I was a panelist at your event. It was awesome, by the way, a yearly event. So stay tuned for En Rouge for next year. But we didn't know each other. And in that moment of trying to figure out or really putting in the universe the thing that I needed, it never ceases to amaze me how the very thing that you need always comes full circle. So we started following each other on social media. And one day I saw you announce your anniversary, I think, of your donor status. And I was like, really? Oh, yes, we got to get an interview. So this is how this all came about. So people, there are no coincidences. When you are supposed to meet somebody, you are really destined to meet them. You just have to put that foot forward, that effort, and actually make it happen. So we're going to make it happen for you tonight. Thank you again for being here. And let's talk about this. So March is National Kidney Month. I have some statistics because y'all know I love to put the numbers out in front of you. 1/3 of African Americans plan to be organ donors. Y'all know we make about 12% of the population of the United States, and only about 1/3 of that 12% of the population plan to be organ donors. So if you are watching this on right now and you are so inclined, go ahead and put in the comments yes or no if it is your plan at this very moment to be an organ donor, because you are likely in the 1/3% who do, or you're in the 2/3% who don't. 38% say they won't donate, and that's due to personal reasons, that's due to medical treatment. Some people just don't want to say why they won't donate. But I want to ask you a question. Why did you decide to be in that, not only in the 1/3 who plan to donate, but you were actually in the 17% of people who actually are donors, African Americans who actually are donors?
Yeah, that's a loaded question because I never planned to be a kidney donor. It was a God thing for me. It was a moment of faith. I remember back in 2010, we had a gentleman that attended our church. And at the time, my husband was deployed. And so I was really focused on my family. I wasn't focused on who was coming or going from our church. And I remember this gentleman, they were praying for him. And I asked the question, well, why are they praying for him? And I found out later that he was in renal failure. And so I just began to pray for him. And believe it or not, I started waking up at 6 a.m. every morning. And I'm thinking, why am I waking up? And then I started lamenting and crying, and to the point where God had gotten my attention. And many people think that God does not speak to them. No, it wasn't an audible voice, but it was, my heart was being tugged, such that I remember talking to my pastor at the time. And I said, I know this sounds crazy, but I think I'm called to give a kidney, but I'm not sure, because this was crazy, right? I never ever planned to do that. And so I, as we get further in the interview, I'll share more, but I wanted you to know that it was a God thing. And it went from praying to me lamenting to me figuring out that I needed to do this. And when I finish telling you my story in terms of how it all came together, it will really blow your mind.
Wow. So despite what most people may think they plan for, this we find out is not even something that you planned for, was not even on your radar, was not even something that you, sounds like, thought about before this time, where you felt so convicted to be a person to help. So getting back to just our awareness, and the main target that I have are African Americans, only because we are underrepresented in healthcare. I am an African American healthcare provider, so I see it every day, all
Yes.
day. It is one of my main efforts and goals to make sure that we are educated. If you are educated, you can make an informed decision. Without the education and the knowledge, you aren't able to make informed decisions. And when someone tells you something, you'll just go for anything because you
That's
don't know
right.
the difference. So
That's
I'm
right.
here to bring you information so you can ask the questions, so that thought that you have, you can ask and figure out what the answer is. There's no right or wrong. When you come to Tip Tuesday and you come to my lives, there are no right or wrong. There's no ridicule if you plan to be a donor, if you don't plan to be a donor. The thing we want to do is give you the education to know what questions to ask, to put a face with the name so that you can see there is life after donor status. Did you see that picture I put up of she and I? There is life after being a donor. So getting back to statistics, 22% of organ transplant recipients are African American. So 22% of the recipients are African American, but only 17% are African American donors. So you see how that number doesn't line up, right? Blacks make up 28% of the people waiting for transplant. Not just kidney, this is a general transplant. So if you know someone right now who is actively on the transplant list for any organ, put a me in the comments, because we make up 28% of the people who are waiting for an organ. We can get organs by several means. There can be a living donor, there can be a cadaver donor. So it's not just one way that you can get and be a donor. So let's talk about it. After you were convicted, you made the decision, what next?
So one thing I wanted to make clear before I continue is that I was registered as an organ donor. I just never considered being a living organ donor. So I wanted to make sure that I
Oh, that's good.
clarified those two pieces, because there are two different things. But once I decided, or I still wasn't really sure if I was supposed to give, because it wasn't like I was giving a bag of chips, right? This was like giving a part of me. And I remember my pastor at the time said, why don't you go and have a conversation with him? And so I remember approaching him, and I said, if someone wanted to give you a kidney, what do they need to do? And at the time, he was so nonchalant about it. So when I was walking out of the door, he handed me a package and said, you could just call Carolinas Medical Center. It was so weird, because I had no idea what I was doing, right? Just scared to death. There was a piece of me that was afraid. But then there was a piece of me that had so much peace, because I knew that I was walking in the right direction. And then he says, you got to know your blood test. I heard that, it was resounding in my ear. And I'm like, well, geez, I don't know what my blood test, what is my blood type? And I said, oh, I had some children, right? Let me call my doctor to see if it's on file. And that's one thing I can say, is that many of us don't know our blood type. So even if we wanted to give, a lot of times we let certain things stop us. One, I don't know what to do. Two, what is my blood type? And so all excuses were taken from me. I went and called my doctor, and I found out I was the same exact blood type as the recipient.
Wow.
Crazy. And I am a O blood type. So that means I can give to everyone universally, but I cannot receive from everyone. What's the likelihood of both of us being the O blood type? That just blew my mind. And so God really had my attention at that point. So do you want to hear the rest of the story, or I want to make sure that I stop and
I'm loving the story. Let's go on with it. I'm loving it.
Okay, so once I called Carolinas Medical Center, and no one called me back. I called for 4 weeks straight. No one called me back. And so at that time I said, well, maybe I'm not supposed to give a kidney. Well, when I was getting ready to give up, I get a telephone call from the recipient, and he said, hey, what do you think about calling Wake Forest Medical Center? I just left there. So I called Wake Forest Medical Center, and believe it or not, they got me in the next day, called me back immediately. And so I started going through the kidney donation process. It was so, there's a lot to it in terms of the donor, but it was worthwhile. And what I mean by that is that you have to go through a series of tests, right? Because they want to make sure that you are healthy enough to give. Now, what people might not know about me is that a lot of African Americans, we suffer with hypertension, diabetes, heart trouble, you name it. And I was no different from my family history. That's deep in my family. And so the doctor said, before you go down this process, you must know that your family history indicates that you might one day suffer from these things. And I said, well, that could be the case, but I feel very compelled to give a kidney regardless. And they said, well, if you should suffer from any of these things, at some point we will move you to the top of the transplant list if you make a decision to move forward. And so a lot of people may not understand the kidney donation process, where they give you have a team, and then the recipient has a team, and they don't talk, because they want to make sure that that donor is making a sound decision. So they don't want the recipient team to interfere with that in any way. So I had an amazing team at Wake Forest. They took great care of me, had a series of blood tests, I had a health exam from head to toe to make sure that I was healthy enough to give. And then you have to go through a psychological evaluation. Why? Because they want to make sure this is a big decision, right? So they want to make sure that you're sound in making the decision. And so obviously everything checked out. Once you go through the kidney donation process, you start to think about, the magnitude of what you're doing. But when you think about African Americans, we are 3 to 4 times more likely to need a transplant. 3 to 4 times more likely. I mean,
Wow.
those are some startling statistics, and they are true. And so my mom battles with kidney disease. My bonus father died from kidney disease. It was one of the ailments. I mean, you think about it, when people think about cancer, you're often impacted by that. But many people don't really consider the magnitude of kidney disease. It's just as high, and it's a high statistic that I think we can prevent. We can prevent so many people from dying.
So I'm glad you brought us here because there is a certain level of awareness as a population of people that we have gained about hearing the word cancer. When you hear the word cancer, you typically have a heightened sense of awareness, but your call out to the point that more people in this country, in this world, suffer from particularly hypertension, one of the main reasons why people get kidney disease than cancer will ever be. But yet we don't place as much emphasis on the fact that hypertension is real. Taking care of your hypertension and your blood pressure is real. Taking care of your diabetes is real, because those things do affect your kidneys. And the thing you said about it being a part of your family history, we can't change our family history.
Yep.
There are things that we can't change that are generationally embedded in our hereditary component. We cannot change that. But what we can do is live for ourselves and take the best care that we can for ourselves. And so I think that's a very good call out, because a lot of times hypertension is not known as a silent killer for just no reason. And people seem to think that because we don't hear about it, it's not as harmful and it's threatened. I always tell people, if you go to the dialysis center, most of the people in dialysis center are minorities. By and large, most of the people who are in dialysis are minorities, and most of them are there for reasons that could have been prevented. Now, we do have some congenital, and we do have some reasons that people could not have helped their kidneys from becoming damaged. But by and large, people do suffer kidney disease from something that could have been mitigated and or taken care of all throughout their process. So
That's interesting. Interesting, because if you think about that as well, about some of the preventable factors, it's been 14 years for me, 14 years. And I have really worked very hard to make sure I'm very aware of my family history. Because I'm aware of my family history, I have worked very hard to control my weight. Like, I'm a little high now, and I can tell it's showing up in my vitals. I know, okay, you're 5 pounds or 10 pounds over your goal weight. So you can get back on the other side of that. You got to drop some pounds. So that's one thing. I've become very aware of what I eat, and the need for exercise, and the need to eat certain foods, or to stay away from certain foods, to drink plenty of water. And all of those things just really help me take care of myself at the end of the day, regardless.
Absolutely. So let's just have just a little reintroduction for those who may have joined us a little later in the conversation. Thank you all for tuning in. We're having this conversation tonight to talk about kidneys, and it's National Kidney Month. I have my guest, Miss Jacqueline Johnson, here, and she is a kidney donor, a live kidney donor. She's talking about her experience, and we're just having some dialogue or conversation. So if you have questions, make sure you put them in the chat or the comments, just so we can get those questions in. But more than not, I wanted to make sure that you just were able to hear the conversation that she had to give, so that you may make an informed decision. If you didn't have time to answer the question, or you weren't here, I asked if you ever planned to be an organ donor. And you said that it was on your license. I think you said that it was indicated on your license that you wanted to be an organ donor. And that's typically how the process starts. You have it on your license and you think, oh, I'm going to be an organ donor. Something should happen to me. Well, I won't know it anyway, is what some people say, right? And so they're an organ donor in that regard. But most people don't think about becoming a living organ donor. Most people, when they at least have the conversation, you think about it in the after, but you are actually a living organ donor. So it's something that you should actually think about before. I know also in our communities, we're deeply rooted in traditions. We're deeply rooted in just taking with us what came to the earth with us in
That's
terms
right.
of the burial process. I've heard that
Yes.
before. And so did you have any naysayers, or were there people who gave you caution about going through this process, maybe lovingly and in the way that they knew with the knowledge that they knew? But can you think about anybody who may have given you just some thoughts of pause about this process based on the knowledge they had?
So absolutely, people care about you, right? And so the mindset of some automatically go to, you might need that kidney. Why are you giving a kidney to someone you don't know? I mean, I heard it all, but my family was very supportive of me moving forward, and I was very resolute in my decision because I knew it was a God decision. So if anybody know me, anybody that knows me know that once I make up my mind, I've made up my mind, and I'm going to move forward. It has been so rewarding for me. Really, my health is better now in terms of my kidney function than it was prior to the transplant. And so I often tell people, out of all of the organs that you have in your body, I mean, if you think about it, you only need one kidney to survive. So we often say, share your spare. It's like a spare tire. Share your spare. Why not? When you have so many people that are on the transplant list, or there are people who don't even know that they are in kidney failure today. And so I just really encourage so many people hearing this story to really think about how you can be of service and how you can be a blessing to others by simply sharing your spare. I know someone else on my board, I shall not mention, but they are a kidney donor as well. And so I believe when they approached the kidney donation process, they were not a match. But guess what? I think you can enter a program where if you decide to give a kidney and you might not be a match, they will find a match for that person and then donate that other person's kidney. I know it might sound confusing, but I think it's called the match program. So don't even let the fact that you may not be a match for the person you want to donate to, don't let that stop you, because you can still move forward and your loved one or the person that you know still receive a kidney if you donate yours. They have some amazing programs out there that the Kidney Foundation or your local hospitals who have transplant sites can walk you through all of the different options. I want to piggyback off what you said, and that is merely to educate yourself. Don't say no, just educate yourself, because African Americans give for two reasons. One is for family, and two, it's a faith move. It's for family and a faith move. If they don't know you, African Americans, they're not giving. And I really implore people to think differently about that.
Absolutely. That's a good call out, because for those who also weren't here early, she just said she gave her kidney to somebody that she didn't even know. And a lot of times we would consider it more if it's our mom or our dad or our sister or our brother or our child, right? But talk about giving your kidney to somebody you don't even know. For those who are faith-based, we know the greatest gift is love, right? So what greater gift to show somebody else than that act of love for somebody you don't even know?
That's right.
And
That's
so
right.
that act of love goes beyond saying and having it on paper. So as we approach our time, I just want to talk about maybe how somebody who feels like, oh, I can put my name on the list and see if I, because maybe people don't know somebody who needs a kidney or who needs an organ. How do you know how they could even start the process to say, I'm open to having the conversations with the, I know here we have Carolina Donor Service. How can they just start the conversation with those who are able to give them that valuable information?
I think you can call the American Kidney National Kidney site. Like they have all kinds of different websites. I started with, of course, I couldn't get through Carolinas Medical Center, but I called Wake Forest. And Wake Forest was a wealth of information for me. That's where I started. But you can go through the Kidney Foundation. They have folk that will answer any questions that you might have, and they have a wealth of information, even from their website. You could call me, like if you have questions about being a living donor. Believe it or not, I have walked so many people through this process since I donated. And that's what it's about. It's about educating and getting answers to your questions. And I'm happy to be a resource for anyone because I'm passionate about giving of yourself, especially sharing your spare.
And just because you get the information does not mean you have to go through with it. Again, it's all about the education. Perhaps it's information you could have to give somebody else who needs it, but you can't give the information to somebody else if you don't have it. So one more thing I just want to touch on before we hop off is you talked about your team and the recipient's team didn't communicate. And some people might think that that is the craziest thing. Like, why wouldn't they communicate? They're giving your kidney to somebody else and they don't talk to each other. Well, I also want to tell you that African Americans tend to have a level of distrust with healthcare providers. So about half of people who entertain the idea of donation change their mind because of lack of trust of their healthcare team. Now, this is just based on what I found in statistics, meaning that level of distrust moved volumes when it came to taking an organ from you. So you already have a level of distrust when it comes to managing my hypertension and my diabetes and your regular provider. But then that level of distrust escalates to about 50% when it comes to taking an organ. So knowing that and knowing that about our community and knowing you were going to have a healthcare team that you didn't know because they weren't a part of your regular primary care provider or your regular provider's care team. How did you feel about just interacting with a new level of team for this particular reason?
Honestly, that was never a factor for me. The reason I say that is because the folk at Wake Forest were so supportive of me and they wanted to make sure I was making the best decision. And so the entire team that I had, I worked with tons of doctors and nurses, and I never felt one time that I was being unsupported. And when I say the teams don't talk to each other, they may have had conversations behind the scenes. But what I will say is that the recipient, I had to tell the recipient that I said, "What are you doing on March 11th?" And he said nothing. I said, "Do you think that's a great day for a transplant?" Like, he literally did not know that I was being cleared for him to donate. And so they never shared anything with him. I was the one providing him with updates. And again, you said that might sound crazy. Well, they don't want what's happening. They wanted to create an environment whereby I could back out at any time. Right. So they didn't want to update the recipient because they were supporting me. I want to shout out the best nephrologist at Wake Forest University, who is a Caucasian woman. And the reason I call out, I want to share that she's Caucasian is because she studies African Americans. That is her study. She does a lot of research on African Americans in the kidney donation process. And when I tell you she is one of the best nephrologists, I had to follow up with her for the first 5 years. And then obviously I would see my primary care doctor every year and make sure I have my test to make sure my kidney is still functioning well, which it is. But she is passionate in terms of the African American community and kidney donation. So I think because I had her and my surgeon, they were top notch at Wake Forest, top notch.
Well, that is wonderful. I'm excited to hear or have you share just with my community, and hopefully they will share this information with their family, their friends, so that again, we can increase awareness just about how vital it is for us to educate and update ourselves on organ donation. So I don't see any questions in the audience, which is unreal. Unreal. I do see a comment that just came through that says her husband, son, and herself are organ donors. So we do have people who are making at least that initial first steps. One thing I did forget to say, though, is, as you mentioned that, it's indicated on your license, is that 66% of African Americans have had no family discussion about organ donation. Isn't that amazing? 66%. 66% of all African Americans have had no discussion about organ donation with their family. So even if you do indicate it on your license, it's in your mind, you haven't had that discussion with your husband, with your spouse, with your parents, with your children, so that they know what your indications are. So we're going to change those statistics, because we are all about changing statistics and changing the way minority health is viewed. So go have the conversation with the people you love, just so that they'll know what your stance is. And let's change these statistics, y'all. Let's give
Yes.
Ms. Jacqueline a round of applause. If you came in later to the conversation, I will give you one opportunity, Ms. Jacqueline, just to let people know how they can reach out to you, contact you if they have questions, if they have further needs and concerns.
Absolutely. Again, I am on all major social media platforms. I'm on LinkedIn under Jacqueline Clark Johnson. I believe Facebook is Jacqueline Clark Johnson as well. And then Instagram is I am Jackie C. Johnson. And then I'm on TikTok. So for those of you that want to see me act crazy on TikTok, I am on TikTok.
So for those who are following me that are from Miss Jacqueline's community, I am Nikidra Brown. You can follow me as well on most social media outlets. You'll find me there as Nikidra Brown. So again, thank you all for joining the conversation. Hope you have an amazing rest of your night. Take this information and share it with others. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.